Okay, are we? Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday to you. This is the Rethinking Schools Safe Return to Site-Based Classroom Instruction Technical Assistance Workshop, and we appreciate you taking the time to be here on this Friday. And the original schedule had us focusing specifically on guidelines number 16 through 30, which we went through yesterday during our public health discussion after Dr. Willis spoke. And so what our thinking is now is that we'd like to open this up as kind of a general Q&A and more of a discussion on any kind of lingering outstanding questions at this point, with the recognition that over the past 36 hours or so, there's been a significant shift in the plans for the startup of site-based classroom instruction, and the understanding that at noon today, we're expecting Governor Newsom to provide more direct guidance on what the state is going to allow and require in the fall for the fall return to school. So what we're going to do, we do have, one of the guidelines, guideline number 19, is focused on the use of outdoor space for instructional purposes, to maximize that space, to share it and coordinate to ensure students have the opportunity to go outside and have instruction outside. So one of the efforts we've been working on with our partners at the county. Max Corton is the director of parks for the county, and he has been working with his colleagues in the Bay Area and the region about how schools can most effectively make use of and incorporate the use of city, regional, state parks as part of the school experience. So we wanted to just take a moment before we kind of get into more general questions and answers. We appreciate, Max, you being here. I got to also recognize that Max has been our fearless leader for the county in the Marin Recovers effort, which has been a pretty significant and I think exemplary model of a community working together to understand how we can most safely open all the various sectors of our economy and our businesses in the age of COVID-19. So thank you so much, Max, for the work that the leadership you've had in the county, and also for the overview that you're going to provide about how we might, as schools, be able to utilize parks in the most effective way. I'm going to hand it over to Max.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to you and your whole team for your partnership and leadership around figuring out how we can reopen schools and everything safely. And as a parent, I especially appreciate all of you and your work. Yeah, I think one of the things we've been talking about, and I think maybe about a month ago, Matt Willis called me and said, hey, one of the challenges around reopening schools is finding enough outdoor space, and would parks be potentially a good fit? And it just seemed like, wow, that could be, a really good fit potentially. Our parks are typically, fairly empty midday on weekdays. And so, and they already have, restrooms and parking and a lot of the, facilities that are needed to support outdoor activities and things potentially like school outside. And so, I wanted to just offer to all of you that I know for our county parks, and then I've also had, been coordinating with our, city and town parks that many of you may already be connected with. And then also, of course, the national parks, state parks, and the water district, who are connected here in Marin through our One TAM initiative. But just that, if there's parks that are in your area that would make sense to help support schools reopening when that's possible, we're happy to partner and figure out ways to support all of you. And of course, for Marin County Parks, we manage the sort of larger regional parks like McGinnis Park, McNears, Lagoon Park, Paradise Park, and Stafford Lake Park, which probably are fairly well set up for something like that, but also a lot of smaller parks, and then the 34 open space preserves in the county as well. And actually one place that you can see sort of the, it's funny, through this, for COVID-19, we've, on our website, if you look for the closures, there's a pretty good list of park facilities and agencies. So in most of the cities and towns manage the sort of more developed parks. And then, of course, out in West Marin, a lot of those are state and national parks. And so we, on our COVID-19 sort of closure page on Marin County Parks website, there's sort of a list and also a link to a map of the parks in the county. So, and if folks have questions, I just wanted to offer my emails there, but if folks want to get in touch with me directly, whether it's a county park you're interested in partnering with, or if you're not sure who the entity that manages the park near you is or how to connect with them, I'm happy to be a bit of a matchmaker to help connect folks with their local park agency, if that's helpful. So I think that's kind of all I've got. I'm happy to answer any questions or anything like that.
Any questions for Max? So one of the things we talked about yesterday with Max was just understanding, like you could literally do a Google map search of your school and kind of zoom out a little bit and see which city parks or regional parks are within a walking distance of your school. And what we wouldn't want is we wouldn't want 17 classes to go to Bernard Hoffman Park at the same time. So some kind of coordination on your campus and within, with other schools in the area, so that, you could maximize the use of it, but not overuse it. There might be like one or two really nice kind of shaded areas and in a convenient place near the entrance to the park that would be a great place to hold a class. But if you have 5 classes converging at the same time, that could be a conflict. So I think coordinated use of local parks is a great challenge and opportunity that lies ahead. But so Max, thank you so much. Are there any? Patrick,
we do have a few questions here.
Okay.
So question number 1 was related to security for the students in the parks. Has there been any thought on how what that might look like?
Well, one thing I could say just from a park standpoint is, the different parks are different, but the regional parks seem specifically sort of, and there's some local ones that are similar, that are sort of easier in terms of some of these things. So, like our regional parks have an entrance station, and we could basically, if there was an interest in use of those parks by schools, we could close them to the general public, just close the entrance gate, and that way the park is essentially closed except to the schools that were utilizing them during the day. I mean, typically our daily use is pretty low just during sort of midday on weekdays anyway. So that wouldn't be hard. And I see this thing about reserving areas, and we do have, typically in a lot of the parks, there are sort of reservable picnic areas, and I'm happy to partner with you guys and think creatively about, we've already been sort of putting up temporary fencing to close certain sort of group picnic areas to the general public. So all of those things are possible, if that's helpful.
And then it looks like there's a question also about transportation. If there's been thoughts on how students are getting to these parks, and is the thought that you want to have parks that are close enough by that you could walk to, or has there been some discussion around transportation?
Yeah, so I can take that. Transportation obviously is a huge and critical issue outside of the use of parks, but just to get kids to and from school. And we have a school transportation task force that has been doing a significant amount of work and have had some initial conversations with public health. We had targeted this week to try to release school transportation guidelines, but there's still a little bit more work to do on that end, and we have the gift of a little bit more time now given the delay the recommendations to not have site-based instruction until after Labor Day at the earliest, and to see how that's impacted by today's announcement by the governor. But we're honing in on transportation guidelines, how many students can be on a bus, what the protocols are, and so forth. But I know transportation is expensive. So I think the most practical and ideal is those parks within walking distance. And then depending on budget and other, logistics around guidelines for transportation, of course, a bus ride out to Samuel P. Taylor or one of the national parks, or parks and open space areas is a possibility, but we know that there is cost involved in that as well, which is a significant consideration right now. So I think with that, Max, we're going to let you go. Of course, you're welcome to stay on and, help us with some other questions, but we greatly appreciate, again, your leadership in the county with Marin Recovers and your specific support of this effort in our schools to get students and staff and teachers to use our parks for instructional areas. So you have a great day, Max.
Thanks. Take care, everybody.
Okay. So at this point, you guys, what we want to do is just make it kind of a roundtable discussion. Honestly, I realize that, 2 hours from now, everything could change. So there's this uncertainty about, what the state is going to require and allow. But if there are specific questions about any one of the guidelines or things that have come up in your schools or districts that we can be supportive of in terms of the implementation of the site-specific protection plan, we're here to address those. And you can, I think we're a small enough group where you can unmute yourself and speak, or you can put it in the chat box. Whatever people would like to do is fine.
Hi, Mike. This is Sheila from Star Academy. Thanks so much for the call and the information. Just back to the school site plan, now that everything's kind of in limbo and in flux, I imagine that the time frame for that is a little bit extended, just reflecting our current situation. Is that accurate?
You mean the time frame for putting the site-specific protection plan in place?
Correct.
Yeah, I think, the bottom line is that, the day that kids walk in the door, and really, as staff walk in the door, a site-specific protection plan should be in place. And so, I feel like there's still significant urgency to, have a collaborative, inclusive process to develop your site-specific protection plan. And the plans may change and get fine-tuned over time, but I feel like that's the urgency right now, is to get your team together, again, as multidisciplinary as possible. Teachers, classified staff, administrators, labor representatives, parents, students, and walk through and go through each one of the 30 guidelines and really define, clarify, understand how you're going to implement that guideline at your school site. And the earlier you can do that, the better, because once that's in place, it opens the door to, everyone coming back in the building, for teachers who may want to come in and get their classroom ready, declutter, that's something that whether the kids are returning on September 8th or October 1st or January 1st, that's something that every teacher is going to want to have the time to do, and having that site-specific protection plan in place, before that happens is the ideal. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, of course, and all that is underway. One last question. I saw Mary Jane's updated the press release that came out this morning for distribution to families. And I noticed in the first press release, there was a clear delineation saying no on-site instruction for the students. We could have them back for orientation and academic assessment, that sort of thing. That specific language was absent from the updated press release. Has there been a change to that? Is there a possibility of having a small cohort on site?
Yeah, I think, I honestly didn't read this morning's press release, but I know that, there's probably we're waiting to hear what the governor has to say, is what I would say. And there is a what we know is last spring, when the shelter in place was initiated and the suspension of classroom-based instruction started, teachers knew their students knew their teachers. There was a relationship. Now, as we enter a new school year, the likelihood is strong that teachers and students have no relationship. They don't know each other. So in the scenario where we're going in to start with distance learning, if there's an opportunity for a teacher to meet with an individual student or a small group of students to say, hey students, my name's so-and-so and it's great to meet you, and I know we've met on Zoom, but here's our classroom, this is where your desk will be when we start. If those relationships can happen, that is a great scenario. But based on what the governor lays out today, that may not be allowed. So maybe that's why the language was removed. I'm not sure. But what determines what a small group is. So what Dr. Willis said yesterday to the question of, will we be able to continue, for example, our special education programs, which are in session right now with cohorts of 12? The answer Dr. Willis gave was, I don't know. We have to wait and hear from the state. Does that cover it, Sheila?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Mike, we have a few questions that I can go through here in the chat box. One of the questions is asking about direct and indirect contact in terms of cohorting and contact tracing. And I can start to speak to that. And if you want to add to it, Mike, my understanding is that the definition of close contact that's used in contact tracing is being within 6 feet of someone without a mask for between 10 and 15 minutes. And so the way that I think about that is we want to create systems and protocols and set up our facilities so that that close contact, that 10 to 15 minutes unmasked within 6 feet is not happening, is limited, is mitigated. But the difference between direct and indirect contact, I don't have additional information about that. I don't know if you can add to that, Mike.
Yeah, and I think what you described is right. It's close contact, less than 6 feet without a mask for 10 minutes, or 15 minutes, depending on who your source is. But the bottom line is, in that situation, that's part of the contact tracing team that public health is putting together. They will answer that questions in real time when the contact tracing is being done. And I see there's a question that's related about how many negative tests following a positive test would be required before a student or staff had been diagnosed with COVID could return to school, and could you clarify? And there's some specific language in public health. I think it's 10 days without symptoms since the last positive test, or 3 days without fever reducing medication without symptoms, whichever is less, or whichever is greater. But this would be another thing where public health or your healthcare provider would probably have to write a letter of saying this person is okay to return to school, is my guess.
We have another question here, and I might need some clarification from Brenda. Should we coordinate this with Max? Is the question? I don't know if Brenda is available to clarify the question. Brenda.
Oh yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So we're in Marinwood, and we were just thinking about different ways to do a drop-off so that we could, and then of course we would have the health check-in too, but to have students and teachers sort of hike back to school or walk back to school. And we were wondering who we would need to check that out with. And it would probably be Marinwood Park, but maybe somewhere else. It would be nice to be in nature and then walk back in to our campus, if possible, of course, after today's information is released.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It sounds like Max can be a help for that contact if you're not aware which agency is overseeing that specific park that's close to your school. So it sounded like Max would be able to and was willing to be that resource to make that connection.
I'm just worried about having a lot of cars in a neighborhood, and so there probably will need to be some sort of coordination with that too.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think that this is where the travel logistics versus, in vehicles versus walking is big. The focus and ideal, I think, from the outset should be on parks and open spaces within walking distance, and the transportation part does complicate things, but it's not that it can't be done. I see there, Doug is asking about the requirement to serve meals to free and reduced students when providing remote learning.
Yeah, Mike. I just recently heard something that even though you're doing remote learning, you have to provide meals for students that are on the National School Lunch Program for free and reduced meals. So, for some schools, even though students might not be showing up, you still have to have someone there to pass meals out. Is that what you've heard also?
Yeah, that's the way it was this spring, and I
at each site though, at each school.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Doug, but I know that this is a very sensitive and critical topic that is not unique to our community, but I know that it's a priority of the state to make sure that and so I'm not sure exactly how San Rafael did it, in the spring, but
you could do it in a group setting, so you could do it in regional areas, but there might be a program now that you actually have to provide it at every single school, and so that's where it's a little bit different for us.
Yeah, so we will seek clarification on that. That's an important topic, and it impacts so many people. And I know that we were involved in it in the pop-up child cares when Novato had a few kind of distribution sites, and sounds similar maybe to what you did. But we'll see. We'll try to get as much information as we can about that and share it.
Yeah, because it wasn't an instructional minute requirement before.
Right.
Now there's the instructional minutes are required. So if you didn't have instructional minutes for 3 hours or less than 4 hours, you don't have to provide a meal.
Right.
But now that the instructional minutes are, the minimum instructional day, even though it can be remote, I think that might be the point, the problem there. Also, I asked this question last time, but I just want a clarification again.
Yeah. And
remember the SLP where it's speech and language or counselors,
right,
or small group instruction where you have students together. Even if you have a barrier between each student and staff, you still have to have 6 and a mask. I thought you said you still had to have 6 feet distance, even with a barrier.
Yeah, I think 4 feet is permissible in our guidelines.
4 feet. Yeah, you're right. 4 feet. So you still need, whether you have a barrier or not, it's 4 feet.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it, and I think that that's backed up by public health, and if the plexiglass doesn't go from ceiling to floor, maybe I'm saying that in jest a bit, but plexiglass is expensive. We just purchased these kind of plastic corrugated cardboard ones for $20 that are 2-sided that are actually pretty good and super portable and light, and it's just an additional measure of stopping the transmission or the spread of droplets and transmission. But my understanding is it's still in an open room, even with 2 or 3 foot plexiglass, it's still 4 feet of distancing is permissible.
If I could add to that as well, Mike, I know that there's been, it's been encouraged to potentially look at these humanity shields, which can serve as a resource so that teachers, you can still see their face if they're doing instruction with these students. The barrier would be a nice addition, but these humanity shields could really help in a situation like that as well.
But you would still need 4 feet distance, even with a
Correct.
humanity shield.
Yeah.
Okay. And my I do have a couple more, but regarding the testing from Department of Health and Human Services, I think I forgot to put a little bit more in there. I guess more timely, if there's a negative finding, my understanding is Department of Health and Human Services, because of the workload, have a hard time getting timely negative results to people. The positive results that they get to people quickly, but it's the negative ones that sometimes they don't have, they're not able to get those out to you, to the sites and to the schools in a timely manner. And so if they wait the 14 days, we ask, I want a negative, show me that you have a negative, test result. What if they don't have it?
Yeah. So this is a huge and, priority issue, I know, for public health, and they're working on a transition to a new private, testing and processing results. The only way that we can really do effective contact tracing is to have expedited testing and test results reported, positive and negative. So I know that Dr. Willis, Dr. Santora have been pushing hard on this. Again, this isn't unique to Marin, it's statewide, and there is a big urgency to get more readily available testing for school staff and cohort students, cohort-based exposure or symptoms, and rapid turnaround on test results. That's a priority, Doug. I don't have, and I think everyone agrees that has to, in order for us to be able to limit the spread, we've got to get quick testing and quick results. And I know there's no bigger champion of that than our public health officer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, so there's some other questions here in the chat box. One question is in regards to supporting distance learning workshops, assistance with the understanding that there is likely to be some delay in the start of the school year. So has there been some work done on ramping up and supporting distance learning?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of work done. I know at the district level, districts have been working hard to provide resources and training for their staff. We have a bunch of resources available on our website for distance learning. I know we're offering kind of some Google Classroom certification trainings that are underway right now or coming up. We can post more information on that, and it's on our website. But yeah, clearly, and from the outset, we've known that this school year and moving into the future, distance learning is going to end up being a critical and central part of public education and private and independent parochial school education moving forward. And I know that schools and districts have been working on that. So I would just say check with your district, check with your school, and also know that there's great resources available on our website.
Okay. It appears as though we have a hand raised here from Theresa. Theresa, would you like to?
I would. Hi, thanks so much.
You bet.
Theresa, I'm a parent to a rising 6th grader at RVSD. And my question is around one of the requirements that came up yesterday, or one of the guidelines from yesterday. And it's about how the cohorts or groups will be defined. If they aren't already, when will we know what group our child is in, and hopefully prior to school start, just so we can possibly begin discussions with those groups, or at least, knowing who they are, relieving some of the anxiety around the start of school and being just on a video chat with the teacher as school starts. So basically, do you have an idea? Maybe this is a Marcy question. I don't know.
Yeah, so is Marcy here?
I think so.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I am here.
Hi, Marcy.
You want me to go ahead and take that now? I don't know how many RVSD families.
I think we're having a hard time getting her audio right now. Marcy, are you muted?
She's really low.
Yeah.
Let me go through my computer.
There we go. We hear you now.
Sorry, I had my my laptop lid down. Okay, so I'm not sure how many RVSD families might be on the call, but I can go ahead and give an idea of that, Theresa, and for any other families, which is, first of all, we need to know how many students we'll actually have in our schools, because this I'm just going to apply to all the families, not just White Hills 6th grade, because I did get an email from another parent last night about that. And so what we do need to do is to know how many and who is going to be in our schools next year. And then what we need to do is be able to, and we're working on our back to school packet, but we can't release parent contact information out to other families without going through our parent acknowledgement and release, which if you've been in our schools in past years, you might remember filling out that form at the beginning of the school year.
Yes, ma'am.
What we'll be looking to do is to try to see what we can do to expedite that. But the only thing is, in terms of knowing which teacher your child will be assigned to, is that we won't know for a little while longer as to that. So what I'm thinking is that we will look at how to release and provide families contact information for all of the families at the grade level, but we can't do that until we get permission from the families to release their information. And this year is like any other school year. It has taken some of our schools till November to get the parent contact information or the parent acknowledgement and release form back. So we'll have to play that by ear.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I'm more interested in just the group that the children will be with. The teacher is, to me, is a secondary. It would be those children knowing who they are once you have all of the T's crossed and I's dotted from the paperwork standpoint. But if it's a group of 12 children, maybe, or 25, who they are going to be with. So possibly we might know them already and be able to reach out to them prior.
Sure. And that just goes hand in hand with who they're assigned to as the teacher. So,
I see.
Yeah, so it goes hand in hand with that. And so just the added complexity for middle school is that we are wanting to ensure that we're not tracking students, and we do have leveled grouping, not in 6th grade so much, but we don't want to track them by their elective offerings or those kinds of things. So White Hill principal and assistant principal are working very hard to look at how do they schedule the students into those. But part of that grouping is it's going to be different for the distance learning, which it looks like we're starting the school year doing. And what it sounds like you're asking about is when we return to in-person instruction and have those cohort sizes. Because for the distance learning, they don't need to be cohorted. They're going to be in a full class size as we anticipate right now. We don't, and we haven't gotten it, further along with that, because this guidance of having the students in all students in distance learning just came out the other day. We're waiting further guidance in today's Governor Newsom's press conference at noon to understand what the restrictions or the guidelines will be for schools. So we haven't gotten that far with that, but I don't think for distance learning, students will necessarily be in cohorts of 12. Because
that helps so much, Marcy. That is a huge clarification. If there's not going to have cohorts until down the road, that's completely understandable, and that helps me out. Thank you.
Yeah, and so Marcy and Theresa, thank you for allowing us to sit in on that conversation. And you can imagine that the conversation in Ross Valley, is happening in every district and every school site. Kids want to know who their classmates are going to be. Parents and kids want to know who their teachers are, and it's the relationships that that will help develop the experience of the year. And so thank you for helping us with that. And Karina, were you trying to say something? Okay.
I'm going to jump to another question here, Mike. There was a question specific to sports equipment, such as balls. Would sports equipment such as balls be okay if separate for each cohort? And the way that I understand that is yes. we want to try to clean, if possible, sanitize that sports equipment in between use, and really make sure that we're pushing good hand hygiene before and after. But sports equipment such as balls, based on my reading of the guidelines, would be okay with those other mitigation measures in place.
Agreed.
Let's see.
Okay, I see one here on hand washing stations. If they're not available, can hand sanitizer be used? The answer is yes, but hand washing stations are preferable to hand sanitizer. So, there are some classrooms, for example, that don't have a sink and soap in them. So in our special education classrooms that don't have a sink and soap, even if they do, there are times when the teacher just goes around and gives every student a little bit of hand sanitizer on their hands to help keep their hands clean and sanitized. But hand washing stations should be available to every classroom within a reasonable, distance.
So there's a question here regarding the humanity shields. Can students use face shields that don't have a drape? This question is coming up specifically from our younger elementary families. And the way that I'm reading the guidelines currently is that students will be asked to have a face covering, not a face shield. Mike, do you read that differently or have a different answer to that?
Yeah, that's the guidance right now, is that the face shields without the cloth don't meet the mark at this point.
Let's see.
Mike, can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, so there's this question about is a face shield an adequate replacement for a face covering? And the answer is no. Right now, unless it has a cloth drape that catches the droplets that are expelled,
it just humanity shield.
Right, the humanity shields are an example of what Dr. Santora said would be a reasonable, alternate to a face covering, because it captures the droplets that are expelled from the nose and mouth. And she's even considering, specifying that in future guidance as guidance is updated to spell that out, but she's given the okay for that.
So
okay.
There's a clarification question here to clarify the response from, I think this person meant you, Mike, to Doug, about 4 feet required between staff and students wearing a humanity shield. Is 4 feet required between staff and students wearing a humanity shield?
Yes, the answer is yes, and the 4 feet, the 4 to 6 feet physical distancing remains a requirement, regardless of what other barriers you have.
Oh, and it looks like Doug had helped answer that. Do we have any info on transportation guidelines?
Yeah, so again, this is something that we talked about briefly earlier, that we have a task force together. We've kind of developed and consolidated guidelines that are close. We've had brief conversations with public health about them. We had targeted this week to release them, but with the new recommendations and the governor's announcement today, we know that we have a little bit more time before the buses will be rolling with students. So we hope to finalize those with public health and release those shortly.
It looks like there's a resource for another type of shield as well, so thank you for that.
That's great. I can't wait to look at those. The humanity shields are not cheap. They're fairly expensive. They're cool, but they're very expensive. Okay, so what I'm going to say is that it's 10:40 now. In about an hour and 20 minutes, the governor is going to make some announcements that may help shape our next phases of planning. And what we will do is we still have the next 2 Fridays at 10 o'clock are on our calendar for technical assistance workshops, and we are open to input from the community about how we can most effectively use that time. We feel like the dialogue kind of meeting format that we've been using the last couple of weeks is very helpful to everyone. And we encourage you to continue to send your questions and suggestions and recommendations to our rapid response at marinschools.org. And we thank you so much for everything you're doing to support the effort for a return to site-based instruction when the public health indicators and the state permit that. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you at the Governor's News Conference. Take care, everyone.